I came home 2 days early to surprise my husband. From his office came laughter and a voice I didn't recognize. Marrying her is like a life sentence, he said to someone whose name I didn't know. If it weren't for her family's money, I would have escaped last year. Sometimes I think the worst part of betrayal isn't the act itself, but the silence that follows. That specific, deafening silence that crashes down on you when the world you've built over 3 years shatters into dust in 30 seconds. We had just celebrated our 3rd anniversary, not just with dinner, but with a vow renewal ceremony. He stood before our closest friends and family, held my hands in his, and spoke about how I had changed his life. His voice trembled. He cried, looking right at me. In that moment, I was absolutely certain we were 2 halves of a single whole. A week later, I left for a short getaway with my girlfriends. The plans fell apart on the 2nd day. One of the girls had a severe migraine attack. Another was urgently called back to work. I thought it was fate, the perfect chance to surprise him. I pictured his face so clearly, the shock, then that particular soft smile that appeared only for me. On the way home, I bought his favorite craft beer and that specific cheese pie from the little bakery near his office. I tiptoed into the house, stifling a laugh, a bag in one hand and my keys in the other. The air in the hallway was still and cool. I set the bag with the beer down on the floor so I wouldn't drop it and froze, listening. His voice came from the office, loud and unguarded, not meant for my ears. Trust me, I wouldn't last a day in this gilded cage if it weren't for the prospects. Her father hinted yesterday that he might offer me a position on the foundation's board next quarter. That's all that matters. I stood there, my back pressed against the rough texture of the wall, feeling the cold plaster seep through the thin fabric of my dress. My temples pounded. Gilded cage. That's what he called our home, our marriage. And those ridiculous renewed vows, he continued, and I heard the familiar click of his lighter flipping shut. A whole performance. Had to make up all that sentimental nonsense just to see the tears of delight in her mother's eyes. Worth it, though. A small price for a key to the kingdom, right? I didn't hear the rest. A high-pitched ringing started in my ears, drowning out his words. My body moved on its own. I picked up the bag, the bottles clinking softly, a sound that now felt obscenely cheerful, and silently retreated back through the front door, closing it without a sound. I sat in my car in the driveway, the engine off, the cheese pie and the beer sitting on the passenger seat like artifacts from a life that had just ended. The man I loved, the one who cried during our vows, was a carefully constructed performance, and I was the audience who had believed every second of it. I drove, I don't remember where, just away from our house, from the sound of his voice, from the ghost of my own naivete. I found myself in the parking lot of a grocery store I never shopped at, the engine off, my hand still gripping the steering wheel. The cheese pie sat beside me, a mocking symbol of a happiness that had never been real. Gilded cage. The words echoed in the silence of the car. I thought about the way he always deferred to my taste in art, calling my preferences refined. I remembered his initial reluctance to let me pay off his student loans, the internal conflict he'd so painfully described, before finally sacrificing his pride for our future, a future he was apparently counting down the days to escape. How long had he been planning? Was there a calendar in his office with dates crossed off? I looked at my phone. I had hours before I was supposed to be home. I opened my banking app, my fingers cold and clumsy. I navigated to our joint accounts, the ones I rarely scrutinized, trusting him to manage our day-to-day finances. I started scrolling through the history, and there it was, a pattern I'd been blind to. Dozens of transfers, never large enough to trigger an alarm, always to an account I didn't recognize, listed as business expenses, consultation fees, investment opportunities. A slow, steady bleed of my money. The life we were building was a lie, and its foundation was being quietly dismantled brick by financial brick. I went back at my usual time. I had thrown the beer and the pie in a dumpster miles away and rehearsed my lines in the rearview mirror. The trip was cut short, the girls were disappointed. I'm just tired." My heart was a block of ice in my chest. When I opened the door, he was there, smiling that soft, practiced smile. "You're home early," he said, coming to kiss my cheek. His lips felt like a brand of betrayal. I forced myself to lean into the touch, to smile back. "I missed you," I lied, the words ash in my mouth. He took my bag, his demeanor overflowing with concern. "Rough trip? You seem distant." The observation was a scalpel. He was watching, always watching, calibrating his performance based on mine. "Just a long day," I murmured, heading for the kitchen, needing space. "I think I'll just make some tea," he followed. "Everything okay with your dad? You haven't mentioned him lately." The question was too casual, a hunter checking his traps. My father had in fact called me last week to excitedly discuss a new philanthropic project. My husband's eyes were a little too bright, his posture a little too eager. I turned and looked at him, really looked at him, for the first time since I'd heard his truth. I saw the calculation behind the concern, the ambition masquerading as love. The ice in my chest cracked, replaced by a cold, clear fury. "I think the bathroom sink is leaking again," I said, changing the subject, my voice unnervingly calm. "I'll call a plumber in the morning." The flicker of confusion in his eyes was brief, but I caught it. He was the fixer, the handler of such things. It was a small thing, a tiny thread pulled from the tapestry of our roles, but I saw him notice the ground, ever so slightly, had shifted. The next morning, I called the plumber. I didn't ask, I just did it. When the guy showed up, my husband stood in the doorway of the kitchen, watching, a confused frown on his face. "I could have fixed that," he said, a slight edge to his voice. "You've been so busy with your projects," I said, not looking up from my laptop. "I didn't want to bother you." The silence that followed was thick and heavy. I could feel his gaze on me, trying to decipher the new code I was speaking in. The plumber charged $90 for 10 minutes of work. I handed him my personal card, the one linked to the account my husband couldn't touch. I saw my husband's eyes track the movement, his mind visibly calculating the waste of money that could have been saved. It was a small, deliberate act of independence, and it landed exactly as I'd hoped. Later, I accidentally left a browser tab open on our shared home computer. It was a search for financial advisors for separate assets. I left it there all day while I went to run errands, which really meant sitting in a park, watching families play, and feeling a profound, hollow loneliness. When I returned, the tab was closed, but he was different, agitated. He kept touching my shoulder, my back, as if to reassure himself that his property was still within reach. His phone, which was usually face down on the table, was now permanently in his pocket. The hunter was feeling hunted, and he didn't even know what was stalking him. The psychological dance was exhausting. I started taking longer showers, standing under the scalding water until the bathroom filled with steam, giving myself a few precious minutes where I didn't have to perform. I began mentioning casual lunches with my father, dropping vague phrases like estate planning and long-term portfolio adjustments into conversation. I was building a ghost, the specter of a changing financial wind, one that might blow his carefully laid plans off course. His panic began to manifest in strange ways. He started fixing things. The wobbly bookshelf in the study that had been leaning for a year was suddenly straight. The flickering hallway light was replaced. He even cleaned out the garage, a task he'd sworn for months was pointless. It was a frantic, unspoken resume of his value. "See, I am useful. I maintain the cage." Then came the calls. I was at a cafe, finally confiding everything in my oldest friend, when my phone buzzed. Once, twice, 5 times. I silenced it. When I checked an hour later, There were 27 missed calls, all from him. My friend stared at me, her eyes wide with alarm. What in the world is happening? I knew. He'd found the printout. Before I left, I'd printed the bank statement with his suspicious transfers and left it in plain sight on my desk. Not hidden, just there. A silent accusation. He'd seen it. The dam of his composure was cracking. I took a deep breath, the cold clarity returning. The mouse was finally starting to panic in the maze. I picked up my phone to call him back, my voice already shifting into the role of the confused, slightly busy wife. It was time to see how deep his performance could go when the stage was starting to collapse.
His voice was a frayed wire when he answered, "Where have you been? Is everything okay?" The concern was a thin veneer over pure panic. "My phone was in my bag," I said, layering my tone with mild confusion. "I was just running errands." "Why? What's the emergency?" There was a long pause. I could almost hear him scrambling, trying to fit the pieces together. The bank statement, my distance, the missed calls. "No emergency," he said, forcing a calm he clearly didn't feel. "I just had a weird feeling. You've been different since you got back." "Different how?" I asked, turning the question back on him, a technique I learned from watching him all these years. "I don't know, distant. And you've been talking a lot about your dad's business. Is something changing? Are we okay?" He slipped the financial inquiry between feigned concern for our relationship, a classic move I now saw with devastating clarity. "Everything's fine," I said, my voice a placid lake. "Just busy. Why would anything be wrong?" The silence on the other end was so profound, I thought the call had dropped. Then, softly, "No reason. I just love you, that's all." The words, once my anchor, now felt like a violation. "I love you too," I echoed. The biggest lie I had ever told. After I hung up, I didn't cry. I sat in the quiet of my car and made a list. Not of groceries or tasks, but of assets, accounts, and a timeline for my escape. The grief was still there, a dull ache, but it was being steadily eclipsed by a cold, focused rage. He had built a life on a lie. I would dismantle it with the truth. The final piece fell into place by accident. He was at the gym, and I was wrestling with a moral dilemma. Did I sink to his level? The answer came swiftly. This was no longer a marriage. It was a survival mission. I searched his office. In the bottom drawer of his desk, tucked beneath old tax documents, I found a sleek black notebook I'd never seen before. It wasn't a phone, but it was more damning. It was a ledger, page after page, in his distinct handwriting or records, dates, amounts transferred to an account labeled D, and notes, investment in future freedom, consultation fee for patience, and then the entry that made my blood run cold, dated just after our vow renewal, ceremony performance bonus, 2 more years until vesting, patience. Vesting? He was treating my family's trust, our life, like a stock option. D was the beneficiary. I didn't know who D was, and in that moment, I didn't care. The evidence was in my hands. I took photos of every page with my phone, my hands trembling not from sadness, but from a terrifying, galvanizing fury. I carefully placed the notebook back exactly as I found it. The performance wasn't over yet, but I now held the script, and I was about to rewrite the ending. Armed with the photos of his ledger, I moved with a methodical coldness I didn't know I possessed. I met with a lawyer, a sharp, discreet woman recommended by my best friend. I showed her everything, the bank statements, the recorded phone call I'd made to him confirming the D transfers under the guise of budget planning, and the photos of the ledger. Her face remained neutral, but her eyes were like flint. "This is premeditated financial fraud within the marriage," she said. "We have more than enough."
I didn't confront him immediately. I let him stew in his own anxiety. I withdrew the remaining funds from our joint accounts, leaving only a nominal sum. I moved my most precious belongings, my grandmother's jewelry, my old journals, the first photograph we ever took together, to a safe deposit box. I was erasing myself from the life we'd built, one silent, deliberate action at a time. He felt the walls closing in. His charm became cloying, his attentiveness desperate. He planned a lavish weekend getaway to a coastal resort, presenting the brochures with a triumphant smile. I thought we could reconnect, just us. I looked at the pictures of infinity pools and private beaches, all paid for with the money he was so meticulously siphoning away for his future freedom with D. I smiled, the same empty, beautiful smile I'd perfected. "It looks wonderful," I said, watching the relief flood his features. "Let's discuss it properly after my meeting with my parents and the financial advisor tomorrow. It's about the family trust." The hope in his eyes was a physical thing, palpable and pathetic. He was so close to his prize, he could taste it. He had no idea he was about to bite down on poison.
The meeting was in my father's oak-paneled study. My husband walked in, confident, already playing the part of the devoted son-in-law ready to take on more responsibility. My parents were there, their faces unreadable. Our financial advisor, Mr. Sterling, stood by the desk. My father didn't offer him a seat. "Do you have anything you'd like to tell us?" he asked, his voice low and steady. Confusion, then a flicker of alarm. "No? Everything's great. We're actually thinking of a trip." I placed my phone on the desk and played the recording of his voice from my early return. Marrying her is like a life sentence. If it weren't for her family's money, the color drained from his face. He looked from me to my parents, his mask shattering into a million pieces. He started to stammer. That was out of context. I was stressed. Then I slid the printed photos of the ledger pages across the polished wood. "Explain the context of this then. 2 more years until vesting. Performance bonus. Who is D?" The silence was absolute. He didn't even look at the papers. He just stared at me. And for the first time, I saw not the man I loved, but a stranger, cornered, exposed, and utterly empty. You recorded me? You went through my things?" he whispered, the hypocrisy breathtaking. "My lawyer has the originals," I said, my voice eerily calm. "You have until the end of the day to get your things out of my house." He was served with divorce papers that afternoon. The gilded cage door had swung open, and I was the one who walked out free, leaving him locked in the ruins of his own deception. The money wife was gone. I was just me, and for the first time in years, that felt like more than enough.